Well, hello and welcome to Consider This. I'm Joe Clark, your host.
And I'm Angie Kinzer.
Happy to have you all along. Hey, interesting times. We're heading into September. We are 1 month away, well, actually closer than that by the time you guys listen to this, to having your annual taxes filed. Remember, October 15th is the actual deadline. And for those of you who have students with student debt, those kind of issues that are that suffered some issue with the pandemic, remember you have up until September 30th to file for some of that relief. I think Angie's got some fun points for us, though. Good things about Indiana.
It's interesting. The Tax Foundation has some kind of an index where they rated for 2020 the top 10 states that are best for state income tax and the 10 worst. So here's who we have on the best. We have Wyoming, South Dakota, Alaska, Florida, Montana, New Hampshire, Nevada, Oregon, Utah, and Indiana.
Well, there you go.
Second time we've gotten on a list here
New
recently.
Hampshire surprised me, but okay.
Okay, and now the lowest ranked or worst states in this
Now,
year's...
this is from a tax perspective, right?
Tax perspective, that's it. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about where
Well, actually, I spent a whole, probably 2/3 of the market carver this week. And if you're not on that list, folks, it's free. You know, we do it either myself or Adam Harder does it every week. It comes out to you at 11:04 on Thursday afternoons, Thursday mornings, Eastern Standard Time. And we talked about some of the housing issues, especially that are going on in Manhattan and New York, which I'm sure is going to make your list of one of the worst places.
Yeah, these are the lowest ranked states for this year's index. We have Louisiana, Iowa, Maryland, Vermont, Minnesota, Arkansas, Connecticut, California, New York, and New Jersey.
I would have never expected Iowa to have been on that list.
What about Louisiana?
The property taxes are pretty high there. Well, Louisiana's got some issues in some of its tax code. It's the only state in the country that's still under Napoleonic law, so it's a little bit different in some regards. And we've got families there that we take care of, so we're a little bit familiar with that. But that is not it. Indiana is just a great place to be. And for those of you that are listening around the country, welcome. Happy to have you. We've got people in 31 states we take care of, but you know, Indiana is our home, and it's where probably 85% of the families that we take care of reside here in the state of Indiana. It's just, it is home for us.
Well, and last week it made the top of the list of homes whose values, or states whose homes value are increasing.
As you would see on the market carver, it was number 7th out of 10 for the rent issues that are going on in terms of things that are happening. So, hey, you're listening to Consider This. I'm your host, Joe Clark. If you guys are interested and ready to go and it's time for you, give us a call for your Next Steps meeting. It's 90 minutes. It's a complimentary thing. Give Angie a call at 800-928-4001. We'll take a break and get right into the show. Hey, folks, thanks for streaming with us. If you've got questions or comments, make sure you send them in. Chris Rogers is monitoring our chat room tonight to make sure any questions you get, he gets put to Angie. So that we can get them on the show. This is your special time between the breaks. Obviously, with radio, we're stuck with the 12-minute segments they give. Here, we can be a little bit more flexible and happy to do that. So what's our first topic, Angie?
We're going to talk about the 8 most pressing questions about estate planning. We may not get through 8, but...
I promise we won't get through 8.
No.
All right, Casey, let's go. Well, good morning and welcome back to Consider This program. I'm your host, Joe Clark.
And I'm Angie Kinzer.
There are many, many things to talk about when it comes to estate planning, but we found an article that said, here are the 8 most pressing. No way we can get through those. I think we can probably cover 2.
Okay.
Now, this is their opinion. I'm going to tell you whether or not I think this is impressive, whether I think it's one of the most pressing issues or not. And then number 2, we'll tell you what we think you need to consider about this.
Here's the first question. If I add my child to my bank account, do I still need a power of attorney?
So here's one of the interesting things that I learned going through becoming a certified financial planner. They teach you the law. They teach you the rules, right? And then I spent 10 years on the backsides where I say I got my Harvard MBA. I spent 10 years in a partnership with CPAs, a large group of CPAs, where I could learn the things that I thought I knew as a CFP that I didn't know, and things that I thought they knew as a CPA that they didn't know, right? And there is a difference between what we learn and what we're taught in school and what actually happens. So the way this happens is if Angie and I have a bank account, and And this is how we're taught in school. So what happens in the real world could be a little bit different. But what happens is, let's say I have a $100,000 account, and Angie's my daughter or whatever, and I want somebody's name on it so they have the ability to be able to help me out if I need bills paid or something like that. A very understandable problem, right? I mean, this makes all the sense in the world.
Right.
And so what people will do is go and put your name on that account. So it now says Joseph A. Clark and Angie Kinzer, right? Now, that by definition under the IRS rules is actually a gift. And the gift that I made to you is equal to whatever half of the value is. So if it was a $100,000 account, I just made a $50,000 gift to you. How much can I give you each year, Angie?
Oh, I forget. 30.
15,000.
15,000.
Barb, since we're married, right? So
Both
she'd
of
be
you.
very unhappy your name was on
get
my
30.
account, for the record.
Yes.
She can give you another 15, right?
Yes.
So that would be 30 that we could give in total, but it's 15 each.
Yes.
That's all fine. That's all fair, fine and fair. But we gave you a $50,000 gift. So we now have a $20,000 tax liability. Now, what happens in the real world is you don't owe anything for that, assuming you haven't used all of your estate gifting abilities. Right now, it's about $11.58 million per couple. So that $20,000 merely comes off of the $11.58 million. However, you still are technically supposed to sign a gift tax return. So putting your name on an account and having a power of attorney are two different things. I have yet to find a bill collector who will not accept a check from anyone. So if you walk up and you said, Mr. Cable TV, Mr. Car Payment Company, Mr. Credit Card Company, I'm here to make a payment on behalf of Angie Kinzer, they will take that check.
Yeah.
Right? You do not need a power of attorney typically to pay a bill for somebody. What you do need a power of attorney for is when you're signing your name on their behalf. That's not paying a bill, right? So if you're trying to transfer a title of a car, or if you're trying to acquire something, trying to make a purchase or a sale, that's where that power of attorney comes into play. And the two really are not connected at all.
So does a joint checking account work like a joint investment account? Whereas if both of the names are on the account, only one of them needs to sign the check?
Technically, here's the weird deal in the banking world, and I'm sure there's some bankers that would take exception to this and argue, but here's my experience. Anybody can clean out the account, but it takes both to close the account. Right? I mean, that's just what I've taken all of the money out of a bank account, and Barb had to go in to sign to close the account. But she certainly doesn't have to go in when we've closed the account because we've had to make a business change somewhere else or to do something. So, that's a little bit of a different issue. But you do want to make sure that your legal documents are in order and make sure that you understand that. So what I try to, and what we teach people to do at the office is, if it were you and I again, and you were the daughter and I was the daddy, and I just wanted to make sure that you got the money, right? We would put a TOD, or a transfer on death, on the account, so that it automatically went to you outside of probate, and those other issues. Then it's not a gift. You don't get it until I'm kaput.
Right. Well, those kind of general. Here's the next question. It's kind of a statement, but then it's asking for your advice. What keeps me awake at night isn't my money. It's worrying about my family and the impact the inheritance I leave on them will have on them. Do you have any suggestions?
Oh,
It's like, that's kind of open-ended.
I like to stand here, and this one I'd need an armchair for, and counseling and serious conversations. I take this question very, very, very seriously. I was reading an article earlier today and it was talking about somebody, like me in my situation. I've been in this industry for 32 years. I'm the managing partner of the company. We've been very blessed. And it gets to be the conversation is, what is wealth? And wealth is really the ability to be able to make decisions much more than it is about a certain amount of money. What you have in Indiana versus what you would have in Irvine, California would be two different things in order to be quote unquote wealth, right? When you really get into there. I think the best thing you can do is to communicate with your family ahead of time about, here's the plan. And one of the big weaknesses that we have in middle America, in my opinion, is we really don't share with our kids what we have, right? So I've got there's a book called The Millionaire Next Door. Not a huge fan of it. It's got some statistical inaccuracies in it, but it really has a good point. And that's that there are people who have not moved out of their house for 30 or 40 years, that have $1 million in accounts. We know it, but the kids don't know it, and nobody else knows it. They still live in their same neighborhood, still go to the same church, still go to the same grocery store. And all of a sudden they pass away, and now kids who are trying to figure out how to make ends meet have $1 million that's handed to them with no experience, no ability to handle it. I think that creates a lot of problems. So we're a big advocate of a thing we call the family bundle, where we actually will let your kids have their money managed by us at your rate, because you probably have more assets than they do, so that they don't make unwise financial decisions. Remember, our job is to help people reduce financial regrets, right? So as opposed to them buying an insurance product they shouldn't have bought, or putting money in some investment that they shouldn't have, we would just as soon take on the workload of counseling them and helping them along the way. And then one of the things I try to teach, and I do this with my own money. We give the girls money every year to put into their Roth IRA, because I would rather teach them how to manage $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 than to manage my life savings if I were to be taken out by a car all at one time. Now, we've got trust and stuff that that work with that, but we want to be smart about how this is and that transfer to that next generation.
Okay, we have a question from Tom in Tennessee. What if I have another trustee and not a power of attorney?
So you have things that are held inside of the trust are going to be managed by the trustee. Tom, thanks for the question, but typically that's you. It's typically what's called a grantor trust, and you are the trustee. So if you're talking about the successor trustee, that successor trustee, by all definition, is what you would consider to be a power of attorney, but only for the things that are held inside of the trust. So let's say you have a house that's not in the trust, or a car that's not in the trust, or a brokerage account that's not in the trust. It doesn't matter what your trustee is, or who your trustee is, rather. They don't have control over those items. Now, for the record, I got to say this again, as I always do. I'm not an attorney on TV or radio. Don't play one. Just giving you my understanding of how it works and what we see happen in the real world. So I'm sure there's probably some legal stuff that could go around with that. But if the trust is not the owner, if you have not properly completed the transfer into the trust, it doesn't matter what your trustee is or who they are or what powers they have. And you get to be really, really careful with that. So that's one of the things you want to make sure, with the exception of your IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, things of that nature. You want to make sure everything else that you can is actually inside of the trust, and make sure that you know your successor trustee and trust them. I've spent 25 years probably working on what we accomplished just this last week. Actually, this week. We are now able to be successor trustees for people. And it was a battle, to be able to get that approval, to get all of the legal stuff in line and in order. You really want to be very, very careful who that successor trustee is. And I worked very, very hard to make sure that got done, because we have so many people who just don't have a choice for a successor trustee.
How do you know when you need a trust?
Well, so this is one of the interesting things. People say it's based on the amount of money that you have. It's really not, Angie. If you had $1 billion, it was all in a life insurance policy, and you didn't care when your beneficiary got it, you don't need a trust. Right? You use a trust for privacy. You use a trust to eliminate probate. You use a trust to be able to have more control over how it's done. I wouldn't want my daughters to get whatever I had left over all at one time. I have money paid out over a certain period of time, so they have multiple opportunities to mess up, multiple opportunities for it to be protected from marital assets. Just in case something would go wrong. Things do go bump in the night, as we all know, right? So you typically do a trust for control, reduction of probate cost, privacy, right? And essentially because you really want to be able to control it in a different way, right? So what I try to tell people on the outside, and I teach that in our workshop class that we have. When I look at stuff inside of most wills or things that are done under operation of law, it's a nuclear option. When you're incompetent or you're incapable, either because of physical or mental incapacity, everything is taken away from you or nothing is taken away from you. And in my trust, I have the ability to define that in a better way. So that's kind of the way I like it. But it really is for those big things. Not everybody needs a trust. If you had $500,000 in assets and you had property in 3 states, you probably do want one. Otherwise, you're going to have 3 different probate estates opened up, and that's no fun for anybody.
Well, the other question, I know we're kind of running out of time. They said, if I have a complete package, is there anything else that I'm forgetting about estate planning? And I think it was alluding to the red button, they're calling it, which is passwords.
Yeah, it's never one and done. I will tell you that. This is something that needs to constantly go on and to be updated because tax codes change, technology changes, and so do sometimes your wills and wishes, people's marriages, divorces, deaths, etc. It's constantly needing to be updated. But if you come in for your Next Steps meeting, it is certainly something that we will cover. Give Angie a call at 800-928-4001. We'll take a break and be right back. Hey, great question, Tom, and I hope that helped you. It is a very, very complicated thing, but when we help people in the Next Steps meeting, what we do is we start with the operation of law, what things are owned outside of a trust, and from there you've got a kind of a yay or nay kind of thing. It's either going to go through what's called testate, means you can have your own will, or intestate, meaning you don't have one. You all do. Anybody in Indiana's got a will. You just may not like what it says because it's created for you by the state of Indiana. Right? So anything that is held that is in your sole name or in your name and a deceased spouse, which happens all the time. People forget to update beneficiary forms. I think the last time I saw it was probably 2014 or 2015, Angie, but it was like 68% of the beneficiaries in the country are dead.
Oh, wow.
I mean, just think about that, right?
We did have another question that came in just as we were ending that segment. Are trusts expensive?
Not near what they used to be. So you've got with the trust, you've got the cost of setting it up, which depending on where you live and what you need, can be $1,500 to $2,500 to $3,000. They don't need to be overly expensive unless you really have some complex stuff. I'm working on one right now that's about $75,000, but it's a very, very, very complex process. It's got many, many moving parts and many, many trustees, and they can't afford to get it wrong. And so there's a lot of hands, a lot of chefs in the kitchen, if you will, on that one. But typically that's not the case. Now, the second part of that is you typically have no operation expense for a trust while you're running it as the grantor or the trustee. Some successor trustees charge money. Like if your kids are your successor trustees, typically they don't charge. I'm a corporate trustee. We have to charge to be able to do the work that we're doing, no different than we charge to manage money. So it really gets into what does that expense structure look like and what do you get for it to decide whether or not that makes sense or not. Just remember, just because you have a successor trustee listed doesn't mean you can't change that later. And that's a very, very important part. Every now and then somebody will say, well, I've already got a successor trustee. And it's like, yeah, but that may not be the one you want. Here's why. So great question. Thank you.
Okay.
What's next?
Ready to move on. This is your case of the 30-year-old, never married.
All right, Casey, here we go. Well, good morning and welcome back to Consider This Program. I'm your host, Joe Clark.
And I'm Angie Kinzer.
And if you wonder why we're saying good morning and it's 5 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon, the answer is very, very simple. We stream this live on Tuesday nights, 5 to 6 p.m. for you. Happy to have you along on that for that live engagement and being able to ask the questions and interact. But it still airs on a bunch of radio stations across the country on the weekends, on Saturdays and Thursdays and Sundays. So whenever you're listening to it, we're thankful that you're here and we're hoping that we are helping you reduce financial regrets. That is our job and our goal. So most of what I talk about on this show comes from one of 3 places. Either Angie's creative mind, your questions and comments, or things that I saw that happened over the course of a week. And I go, those are really good questions. Mm-hmm. This was one of those cases. Somebody reached out to me and said, Joe, I'm going to be 30 and I'm getting ready to get married. And what do I need to be considering? Right? Yeah. So go ahead, Ange.
So one of the questions is, when do you need, now we don't have prenups here in Indiana.
Sure we do.
Oh yeah, we do.
We do.
We don't have.
What we don't have is alimony.
Yes.
And you can still use alimony. We just don't, it's not a fixed part of our world.
Right, it's not forced.
But a prenuptial agreement is an agreement that 2 people have prior to marriage. Again, it has to be prior to marriage. Please keep in mind, regardless of what your attorney tells you, and I'm not practicing law, I'm practicing tax code now. There is a difference. Attorneys will tell you that a prenuptial agreement will hold up for a 401k or a 403b, and they will not. If your spouse or ex-spouse takes that to court, they will lose. Department of Labor unequivocally says that you cannot do that. Now, you can have a post-nuptial agreement. This is the only thing. So Angie and I get divorced. I can have Angie sign off, or after we're married, I can kiss the bride. After we're married, she can sign off and say that she's no longer the beneficiary of my 401k. But other than that, your spouse is the beneficiary of your 401k. I don't care what you get on that document or the prenup. But the prenup just simply lists all the assets that you have ahead of time. This is one any attorney, well, I shouldn't say any, but attorneys can help you with. We can't, or we don't practice law by any stretch of the imagination, but attorneys can help you put it together. Again, by letter of the law, you should each have counsel. Right? So you should have an attorney, I should have an attorney, and it only protects all of the listed assets. So if I try to hold out on you about the Swiss bank account, right, that and you find out about it later, it is suddenly a marital asset. So it is an important thing, and it's one that people talk about. I don't think it's the most important conversation.
Well, opposite of the marital assets, when we get married, will I take on my new spouse's debt?
You will if you signed anything. So this is where it gets to be very, very interesting. In the United States, we cannot put other people in debt, including our kids. A lot of times kids get panicked when they see parents take on debt. You are never responsible for somebody else's debt unless your name is on that application. However, all of their assets are there to protect those debts, right? So if you looked at our situation, if I had $1 million in assets, Angie, and you weren't necessarily attached to the debt, but I died, it doesn't mean you get the $1 million without the debts being taken care of. Make sense? Mm-hmm. There is a little bit of a difference there. It's so you have to understand how both of those situations play out.
Well, also, if you don't have to, if you're not responsible for the debt because you didn't sign, I'm talking about like say a student loan. Mm-hmm. They would still use your income though to qualify your household on whether you could get a student loan.
Student loans are dirty. I mean, they're just messy because it is some of the stuff is based on my household income, and yet I'm not on the debt, right? So it's a little bit different.
You kind of answered this. If only one of us has a savings account, will it belong to both of us after we're married?
It is a marital asset depending on what the judge says at the time of divorce. Now, what we're taught in school is as long as you didn't pull money out of that savings account to be able to take care of our daily functioning, our normal process, that most of the time it's protected. Most judges would tell you the same thing if you inherited a bunch of money from your parents and then I decided to get divorced and take it away. If we never used that money to pay the house payment, the car payment, to be able to buy groceries, that it's protected. But I also seen cases where that is not the case, right? So you can't, you can say this is a general rule. You can't say that's a specific rule without having to go to court there. But there's other questions that I don't think, that I think people forget to ask.
This one's about real estate. It says, each of us owns our own home and plan to be married. If we sell my fiance's home and decide to live in mine, do I need to add him to the deed? What happens to the money from the sale of his home since it was never in my name?
And that part of that is the agreement that you guys have going in terms of what it is you're going to do with the money. A whole host of different things can happen there, but that's where a prenuptial agreement would come into play. And it's, I mean, you do not have to put their name on the deed. We have, I shouldn't say many, but we have families where the deed is only in one person's name. And that happens. Where you should never allow happen, in my opinion, is you should never have your name on the debt and not on the asset.
True.
Right? And and somehow or another that can happen every now and then, right? So, you want to be careful there.
Also, a 30-year-old may ask, what is the first step to begin for saving for retirement?
And that's an important thing. So we're always going to talk about the accumulation phase. We're going to talk about diversification. What happened in this 30-year-old's case is he had about $300,000 of assets that he had saved. This is the youngest generation I've ever seen that has accumulated this amount of money and not very much invested in a market, right? So there are questions that as Angie's a mom of a young man and a wonderful young lady. And if they ask you about getting married, there's things you would tell them to talk about. Where are we going to live? How many kids are we going to have? But there are other things that I think people forget about, right? You can very rarely does the conversation come up when people are 20 and 21. Barb and I got married a month before I turned 22, right?
Wow.
So we weren't talking about savings. We were talking about surviving, right? I mean, that was not, we didn't have a lot of resources, right? So the idea of what percentage of our income do you think we should be saving is not one that would come up for a 30-year-old. Dadgummit, this is marriage counseling stuff, guys. Pay attention here, right? If you're committed to saving 20%, and this young man that had saved that $300,000 was, and did commit to that, and all of a sudden the new spouse is coming in and you don't have that conversation, and they see 20% of the money getting saved in accounts when they go, well, what do we need the money for? What are we saving? That's not the way I was raised. It's not what I believe. Bad things can really, really happen. So you've got that side, kids, whose house we're living in, how we do that transfer, if you will. And then the old adage that I learned years and years ago, a son's a son until he takes a wife, but a daughter's a daughter for life. Make sure you understand what the family plan is going to be on Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Easter. Otherwise, you're just asking for trouble going down the road.
We had a question come in. So, our attorney told me that adding my grandson as a TOD on our house would cause a taxable event. Is that correct?
No.
No, Jim. In Montana, that is not correct.
Sorry, Jim. That adding a TOD is not a completed gift under any of the tax consequences. Now, there could be some weird law in Montana that has something to do with the exemption that you get for owning residency, but a TOD is nothing more than a beneficiary agreement. Nothing is done until somebody passes away. However, and I don't want to disparage anyone, however, what it does do is keeps that asset out of probate. And there are an awful lot of attorneys out there in the world who still practice probate law. And probate law is merely taking your asset, paying them money, and them transferring it to your grandson. So my answer from a tax standpoint on that is no, and I would love to know why I'm wrong.
Okay, here's another question. What is the best way to start saving now for when we have children who may want to attend college?
So in Indiana, if you live here, the College Choice Program is 529. Make sure you do not go through a broker. I got so livid. We do not make commissions. We get paid fees to manage money. And all of a sudden, I looked down 3 or 4 years ago, and we made $9,000 in commissions, and I just went ballistic. And so the College Choice is divided into 2 parts. It's the easiest website I've ever seen in my entire life. If you go through a broker, they have to charge you 4.5% commission. I couldn't figure out how to get it stopped. So we had to move all of that money out of our name into your individual names. But it's an easy program. That's good for up to $5,000 per 1040. So for a husband and wife, you can put in $5,000 a year. Doesn't matter how many beneficiaries you have. You can have different plans if you need to. One plan makes it a little bit simpler. If you're not married and you've each got a 1040, you could each put in $5,000. I wouldn't put in any more than that. I don't think there's anything going to be disintermediated over the COVID virus more than healthcare other than higher education. I really believe 5 to 10 years from now, it does not look like it looks today. I would be very careful overfunding, but boy, it's hard to pass on that tax credit.
Because if you overfund, I mean, you can change the beneficiary.
It's a 10% penalty. There's no way out of it. Yeah, you can change the beneficiary.
You can change and you can move it on to another child, but if it goes unused and you don't have any more educational expenses. But now, are there some educational expenses that are a little, what about when you went to Italy?
Thank you, Angie.
Yes?
Yes, there are some creative ways. I always said if my 529 was overfunded, I want to go to Israel. I've been enrolled in AU to take seminary classes. And if AU had an educational program to go to Israel, where there are credit hours offered, I could, in theory, use my 529. We had kids who did that when I took them to Italy, to a cooking school, and to a place to understand how international trade and international currency actually work. So it's a great point, but I just want you to understand there is no exit. It's a 10% federal penalty if not used for something deemed higher education. For the first time ever, by the way, you can actually use up to $10,000 of it for student debt. That's not something that you had before as an option. Oh, she's pondering now.
I know, because it's like, which one?
Here's the deal. You want to sit down. If you're going to get married at any age, you want to sit down and ask yourself, what is every serious question that I can come up with, and make sure you're not going to agree on all of them. Do not even, and don't think that somebody's not going to change their mind. But the point is, let's at least identify the questions and at least brace the topic, right? Let's broach the topic rather. Let's just make sure that we're on a similar page, not a different solar system. Hey, call Angie, get signed up for the Next Steps meeting, 800-928-4001. We'll tell you what you need to consider today, in the future, and if we choose to partner together, what FEG will do for you. Great questions, guys. Keep them coming. This is interesting, and like I always say, and will continue to say, we do not practice law. I do not mean to say bad things about anybody in any way, shape, or form. And if somebody thinks that I'm wrong on the TOD part, I would love to hear it. But when you make somebody a beneficiary, nothing has happened until you die. Right? Just the easiest way to understand it. So there can be no tax liability attached to that in any way, shape, or form. However, a TOD or a POD, which stands for payable on death, is enough to pull an asset out of probate, and that doesn't necessarily make everybody in the court system happy.
We're going to talk about expatriation, but also you may, since this is segment 3, want to mention about the buyout, not buyout, optional retirement.
We can do that.
Yeah.
Casey. Well, good morning and welcome back to Consider This Program. I am your host, Joe Clark.
And I'm Angie Kinzer.
Interesting times indeed, not just because of COVID, but because of an economy that we're in, changes that are taking place at the speed of sound. And we now are on our third or fourth company that have been given letters, indications that they're offering early separation agreements, if you will, early retirement packages. We had them from Delphi, Lilly. We've seen them come in from Liberty Mutual now, John Hancock. There was another company we just had that we were dealing with here a couple of weeks ago. Allison Transmission. If those things are happening to you, those are very, very serious, life-changing questions. Do not take them lightly. Do not go buy an annuity or buy a product. Make sure that you have the right conversation with people. We have built checklists to help people with this, but it is worth calling Angie at 800-928-4001 saying, hey, I need my Next Steps meeting and I need it quickly, where we will sit down and we will give you what you need to consider today, things you're going to want to consider in the future, and if we choose to partner together, what FEG will do for you. Folks, this is a critical moment in time, and we've had people from Community Hospital where I've helped them do this in the past, where we did lectures and educational things, where one person, the answer was they should take a lump sum and a buyout, and another one is they should take a pension. We've been in places where we've told people that they should take the buyout and retire, and other places where they should stay where they are. It really depends on things that are going on in your life. So give Angie a call at 800-928-4001. This is probably the only time you've had to make this decision. We've been doing it for 32 years. So let us help you where we can. All right, Angie.
Okay, on to the next topic. What is expatriation?
So I try to stay out of political conversations.
You do?
I do.
Okay.
Except maybe not with you, but because you're fun. And I don't know if you remember. I remember when Obama was getting elected. There were a few people who said that if he won, they were going to leave the country. And there were a lot of people, I remember saying, actors specifically, people that, just are nuts, that they were going to leave the country if Trump got elected, right? The technical term for that is expatriation. And so I got into this conversation with somebody and I said, it's just not quite that simple. Mm-hmm. And I go, what do you mean? And I go, well, if somebody who, it is a retail worker who decides they want to leave the United States and revoke their citizenship, why you would want to do that, I don't know. First of all, it costs you $2,350 just to apply to revoke, right? Just to say, hey, I want to leave. You're going to pay the State Department $2,350 just to apply, right? So if I have no money, I don't know why I would want to go through the application process. Right? And if I have a lot of money, I don't know why I would want to go through the application process, right? Because the rules are pretty simple. According to an article I was reading by John Cador, there were 17 people in 2018 that decided that they wanted to leave the country. right? If you're married filing jointly and you die today, you have $11.58 million between the two of you that is 100% estate tax free at the federal level. And if we live in Indiana, Ange, it's free in Indiana, right?
Right.
So we've got almost $12 million we can die with, right? Leave on to the kids. Life is good. People are going to begin to think we're married. We're not. This is just easier. People get confused when I talk about Barb. That's the real wife,
Yes.
32 years worth. But we could do that. If you leave the country, if I decided I was going to expatriate, denounce my citizenship, I'm going to pay taxes on anything above $2 million, not 11 and a half, anything above $2 million. Now, why does all of this happen? What caused it all? And what would happen in the past is people would realize that if they stayed in the United States, they were going to end up paying a lot more in estate tax here than if they left the United States. And the government really never got around to thinking about it, quick enough, if you will, and that's probably why the rules are as harsh as they are today. The most famous case that I know of is a guy named Sir John Templeton. Sir John was a wonderful philanthropist. He was a genius, considered one of the top global stock traders of his time, and built a company called the Templeton Funds. And a lot of people who used mutual funds used them as their international source. And in 1964, Sir John recognized that if he sold the investment firm, he was going to have to pay what appeared in excess of $100 million in estate tax. Now think about that, or in tax. Think about this. It's 1964. Angie, that's 2 years before I was born. Right?
Oh, yeah.
1964, $100 million in taxes, right? And Sir John said, I think I'll leave, right? And so he died, and he was born in Tennessee, died in Nassau in the Bahamas, and took the more than $1 billion. He wasn't a bad guy. He wasn't charitable to the IRS, but he wasn't a bad guy. He took over $1 billion and gave it away to charitable issues around the planet. And it was regarded as a wonderful philanthropist and a great guy. But that's the problem, right? When you've got and you're seeing this right now in this political environment we're at in California, where California, because of, so it's part of the political platforms right now. In the 2017 tax code that was changed, the SALT taxes were introduced. And the SALT tax put a $10,000 cap on state, local, and property taxes that you were able to itemize if you did an itemized deduction. Now, in Indiana, frankly, our state taxes aren't that high. So, you make $1 million, you're paying 30 or 40 grand a year in estate taxes. You do that in Chicago, you're paying $120,000 to $150,000 a year. And I know you're saying there's not that many people that make $1 million. There's enough, especially in California, to make a difference, right? And so what the SALT tax did was essentially limited that deduction, right? So part of Biden's proposal is to come in and to eliminate the SALT tax deduction, right? And get rid of that so that you can go back to deducting as much as you could, because there's this mass exodus of people in California, Illinois, New York, not just over COVID, but because of the tax liability being so great. Right, so you can see a problem that that exists inside of that world. But this stuff gets to be very moving from Indiana, Florida's, which is very citizen. I don't.
Can you do it temporarily?
No,
like, say if
no,
you have.
no. That's different. That's to be where you're going. That's why the United here. Now, there is a thing called taxes in another country. I have a cousin that's with the Lilly Plan in Kinsale Island, right? He's still a U.S. citizen. I mean, they didn't leave.
You were talking about changing domiciles in the states, and what I read from the articles when I was doing my research is a lot of times that can be challenged. So they gave
Especially because of the SALT tax.
Yes. So they gave some suggestions, which are like change your driver's license, change your mailing address, get a job in that state, maximize your time in that state, and you can file a sworn statement of domicile. And best you do.
Being challenged. It's if group left. If I move to Florida, Tennessee, and Arizona,
then
yeah, it's not that simple. In regarded as one. It's as much as and they talk. So people will get in jets and plane.
Wow.
That counts as a day, right? I mean, it's really, really complicated stuff. Just stay. It's
Just
there's more to life than money. If you're going for climate change or something like that, I get it. And we've helped people do that right now.
it notices Florida. They're also down on the bottom now.
It's quickly. Hey, came up and things spend and we'll be able to help people for years. I've done it for 32 years. It's a great 4001. We'll take a break and be right back.
Okie doke.
We didn't have a question that time. You guys don't want to talk about expatriation?
We had a question came in, but it was lagging from the topic before, so we just didn't make it to that.
Well, what is it? So we can help them.
Should my wife and I have joint checking accounts?
If you have enough assets and enough complication where you need a trust, then what you should have is a checking account or a savings account that's inside of the trust. It's not actually in either of your names. That's the whole point. You die, people die, trusts don't die. At least not in a very short order period of time. And so the trust should actually own the asset. That's where we talk about the grantor giving it. The verb that we always use for that is funding the trust. Now, if you don't have a trust, then it can be in your joint name. You don't need to put TOD or POD behind it because it's going to automatically go to your spouse if something were to happen to you. So if Angie and I had money in the same account and it had both of our names on it and something happened to me, it's going to go to Angie, right? Barb can come in and argue as a spouse that she's entitled to 50% of the overall estate. But let's say it's a $5,000 or $10,000 business account that we've got that, is not a significant part of our life savings. It's going to go to Angie, and there's not anything you can do with it. So assuming everything's square and right in your marital life, joint's probably the way to go unless you have a trust.
Okay, this is the article, I think, First Trust. So this is housing and why it matters.
Ah, gotcha.
Because I noticed on your notes that said, how did they get it so wrong? So you're going to have to explain.
No, that's Forbes. Okay. Yeah. I got it.
Yes.
Okay. Here we go. Well, good morning and welcome back to Consider This. I'm your host, Joe Clark.
And I'm Angie Kinzer.
Happy to have you along. We're talking about one of the most interesting conversations of all time. The last crisis we lived through, 08 and 09, it was all about housing to the downside. This one, ladies and gentlemen, unless you're in New York or California, is all about housing to the upside. It is an amazing period of time. And one of the companies that we work with that has really good analysts, in our opinion, is a company called First Trust. We saw estimates come out, and Angie, you've got the numbers in front of you. I don't have a computer screen, but the expectation was like a 1.3 or 1.4 million homes that were started year over year, and it was like 13.9.
It was 13.9 in July. To home sales had increased that much.
Yeah.
And they also
like
talked about
hotcakes.
They also talked about the new median price was up to 330.
Yeah. So what's happening inside of housing, and let's get to the economics of why it's so important first.
Okay.
Housing in autos are two of the things that we watch because they involve what's called complementary spending. And complementary is when the spending of $1 causes you to spend another dollar, right? So this pen, for instance, this is cool technology, by the way. This pen, right, does me no good without this iPad. They don't come together. You have to buy them separately, right? So spending this got me to spend this. The water in my glass did me no good without the glass, right? Spending on water got me to spend money on the glass. What happens in housing is it does you no good without couches and microwaves and pots and pans and dishwashers and da. So spending $1 creates this mass acceleration of spending a lot of other dollars across the board. So the more you can have in housing starts, the better off you're going to be in a temporary economy. Now, what happened when we went back into the Great Recession? Right, we had. Let's go back before that. Let's go back to the 2004, 2005, 2006. The prices of houses were rising so rapidly that many youngsters could not afford to buy a home. And then you had the crash, if you will, in 08 and 09, right, where the banks would not loan you the money to buy the home. And the values of the houses just fell you all remember what it was like. At least I hope you do. It was a very, very ugly period of time, and construction companies went under, and nobody was building homes, and nobody wanted to loan money for you to buy a home. It was really a sad period of time. Well, now we're 11 years later, and I know it's hard to imagine, but we are 11 years past that Great Recession, and you've got all of these millennials that are now those 30-year-old people that I was talking about that are getting married, that are ready to move out and get rid of an apartment and actually begin to buy a house. And the inventory is by one of the reasons people have a job. One of the lovely ladies a job and go to Florida. Not how many people in lives now are able.
I'm sure it's
so the big. You want to work from home the rest of your life? Okay. Pay the taxes. Income by 20%, and you get out your handy dandy HP. Don't use financial calculators. You get out and do the math, and you go, what? It is cheaper. I will save money to take a 20% pay cut, which helps the company, right? and to get out of Dodge, right? To get out of this state, get out of this city, and to be able to move. So we've got this massive amount of relocation going to places like Miami, Austin, Indianapolis, Jacksonville, places where the cost of living is lower. Austin, not necessarily I could say it's lower, but people love that city.
Yeah.
But millennials all sight unseen.
Sold offers on the Troy and didn't come asking.
And I will, since we're here, every now and then I get advice or get asked this question. So this came up last week. Had a dad and both of their kids are actually moving back to Indiana. Both recently grandchildren or grandkids are involved. They're both moving back to Indiana, and they want to make a gift. We're going to test you here, Ange. You ready? They want to make a gift to the kids as part of the down payment. Now, how much can they gift?
$15,000.
$15,000 each.
Each, yes.
Right? So $30,000, right?
Which was
and if they're married,
$60,000.
$60,000. There you go. See how this works? It's changed, by the way. I mean, their account. You do not give them the 60 grand. You want to put the 60 grand in their checking account today, right? So if they find the house in 2 months, the money was already there and the banker's not going to start asking questions where it came from. That, and two, they may have to be able to write a check the day they show up to get to see the house, right? So you want to if you're going to
is the prices.
So it is a challenging thing. The more accessible homes are, the lower rent prices typically become, right? Because we have this strange belief. I'm not a big fan of this, even though I've always owned a carry cost and the sale. Typically, and yet when houses go up, every now and then you actually watch them both go up at the same time. So what's happened here recently is when most people, especially younger people, buy houses, they don't buy them based on the cost. They buy them based on the payment, right? And we are at record low interest rates.
Right.
So the lower the interest rate has fallen, right, the higher the value of the cost on the house has become. At the same time, banks are still adamant about having an actual down payment, right? Yeah. Having some skin in the game, which went away in 05 and 06, right? They couldn't even spell PMI after a while. Right. So now we're back to the period of time where the kids have got to put down a down payment. And unless you have a parent or who's going to gift you the money, or you've saved and accumulated your own, you have a problem where you may be able to cash flow the rent payment, but you can't necessarily put the down payment down for a house. And so what we've seen in some areas is actually a rise in both of them at the same time.
That makes this next question really interesting. If you had somewhere to stay or somewhere to rent, would it be worth selling your home for a profit and waiting on home prices to go down to buy again?
No. And here's why I would say no to that, unless you thought the asset price was going to continue to decline over an extended period of time. Right. One of the rules I always have with assets is before you sell something, you have to know what you're going to do with the capital. right? Money is basically worthless. When I give you your paycheck, when you get it, it does nothing for you, right?
Right.
Except it pays the house payment, it pays the car payment, it buys the groceries, it takes care of Ava, it buys the dogs, right? It's what we can trade for it, right? So you exchange man hours or women hours, right? For cash that you can exchange for something else. I think that's one of the mistakes that people make when they sell a stock. They'll look at a stock and go, well, the stock's up 25%, so I'm selling it. But you're turning around and buying another stock that very likely also went up 25%. And if it didn't, probably shouldn't have, and you probably shouldn't be buying it in the first place, right? So anytime you're moving capital from point A to point B, you've always got to ask that question. What is the transaction cost? And I don't mean commissions to a broker. I mean the taxes to the IRS. What's the transaction cost of making this trade? And secondly, what am I doing in my risk profile? What opportunity am I gaining by making this decision that is coming on? And a lot of times people don't think that. So in houses, especially because there's some emotional attachment to it, you paid $100,000 for the house and suddenly somebody says it's worth $250. It's really, really easy mentally to say, I believe I will sell it and take my $250 and go home, right? The problem is you no longer have a home, right? Now you got to figure out, okay, what am I going to do with that $250? And odds are the next house that you buy also appreciated very similar to the one you did. Unless it's like you, where you like to buy things. I mean, you need something fixed, call Angie. Don't call Joe, because I am not good at it. I mean, she's got hammers, tools, all sorts of good things, right?
Well, now, don't go too far. I can
give you. I can put out your number too.
No.
800-928-4001. Call and get Angie's YouTube advice on how to hang drywall, because maybe she can do it.
I can't hang it, but I can finish it.
There you go.
Yes. The last thing I guess we can touch on real quick, how does it relate to job? I mean, everything, the prices are high.
Well, where the most jobs are and where the most new opportunity is, prices will be higher. That's almost an always adage. Where the most opportunity is, where the prices are, weather's one of those things, right? But when people can move easily, that you'll find pots and bubbles of increasing prices. Hey, give Angie a call, 800-928-4001. Get signed up for your Next Steps meeting. We look forward to meeting you. We'll take a break. 800-928-4001. All right.
Now we're into the outro, which you were going to bring up the Zoom.
Okay.
Zooming better.
Zooming better.
Yeah. And then I will also bring up what I told you earlier after you talk about how this was nothing and now suddenly it's huge. Zoom.
Got it. All right, Case. Well, good morning and welcome back to Consider This Program. I'm your host, Joe Clark.
And I'm Angie Kinzer.
So we lost a great guy last year. Clayton Christensen was a professor at Harvard. He was an MBA. He wrote a book called The Innovator's Dilemma and a few other books. And he talked about one of the challenges that in an economy where the big money has all of the game, when they've got it all, it's very, very hard to beat them. So Zenith, remember that company?
Yeah.
All right. Magnavox.
Yes.
Right. RCA. Right. These big companies had many, 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 many more millions and billions of dollars than this itty bitty company called Sony. And when Angie and I were walking around in 7th and 8th grade, we had these ugly things strapped to our arms. We were bad customers with not a lot of money, listening to pee-poor equipment. But Sony figured out how to innovate, if you will, a transistor, and the other guys spent millions and millions of dollars, went out of business, and Sony obviously prevailed with the Walkman, and life is good for Sony. It's a great book if you want to read it, Innovator's Dilemma. When you have crisis, you will have companies that fold. You will find out who as Warren Buffett puts, who was wading naked on the beach. When the tide goes out, it's pretty easy to figure out. I like to say all hat and no cattle. There are weak businesses that just shouldn't have been in business, and the virus kind of just exposed them, right? There are companies that are going to figure out how to survive this, and there's going to companies that figure out how to thrive through it and do even better. We've totally pivoted. If you haven't noticed, the Financial Enhancement Group, we do digital training now. We do all of these other things that are going on. We stream this radio show so that you guys can be actual participants in terms of what's going on. We thrived coming out of 08 and 09, and we will thrive coming out of this. But you're going to see different companies do different things. One of the examples is a Microsoft product, right? Microsoft's this big old behemoth, right? Zoom is this relatively new technology. I have to Zoom all day long, most of my life, and I'm looking over here at Angie, and I got a camera over here, and my eyes are off, and suddenly Microsoft says we can fix that. And so Microsoft creates a technology that now moves my eyes so that I can still see Angie, but I look like I'm looking at you. And it is just amazing. And folks, the things that are going to come out of this that are just phenomenal, things we never even thought about, things like Zoom that hardly anybody used, to a period of time where everybody uses it. Now we're figuring out how to make it better. This is a sad time for the businesses that aren't going to make it. It's a sad time for the loss of human life and the confusion and complexity. But don't misunderstand the innovation and what will happen to our economy. 800-928-4001. Have a great week, my friends. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Hey guys, thank you for all of the questions, the comments, the things that you send to us. Don't forget you can email those. Consider this program at yourlifeafterwork.com. We look forward to them, to being able to help answer. I do my best, and Angie does as well, to build this show around what it is you really want to learn and what you want to experience. So if you give her a call at 800-928-4001, ask questions, get signed up for the Next Steps meeting. We look forward to meeting you and having you in soon. Have a great week.